Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Salam, hello, peace to you all. Welcome to the struggle session. I'm Adnan Hussein. As you can probably tell from my voice, I've been ill recently with one of these seasonal flu colds that I've picked up on my recent travels. But luckily, we have such a wonderful, articulate, and insightful panel of guests, of 4 guests, that you won't hopefully have to listen to me too much. On a more somber note, this 5th edition of the Struggle Session monthly live stream panel is dedicated to the memory of Roriki Hutchinson, a comrade that I'll talk about a little bit at the end before we close, but I just want to dedicate it to him and to his memory. Now, I also do have to ask you to post your questions, comments, and suggested topics in the YouTube chat so that we can interact, have a good discussion, and pose whatever you'd like to the panel. Also, why not like this stream so that others can find out about it, or share the link on your social media right now. Invite others to join. As I like to say, don't be miserly with something good going on. Share it so that other people can learn from and benefit from it as well. You can subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any of the weekly office hours or these monthly struggle session live stream sessions. And if you're watching on X, please do retweet. And if you'd like to join the discussion, if you're watching on X, come to the YouTube chat so that we can see your comments. You can also support this public educational project by becoming a supporter on patreon.com/Adnan Hussein, or make a one-time contribution via buymeacoffee.com/Adnan Hussein. Now, I'm really excited that joining me today, as I said, is just a really wonderful group. I can't, in fact, think of a better group to bring together, given what I think are some of the big topics and issues in the news that have been coming up over the course of the last month, and especially in the last few weeks. Joining us today is anti-imperial legal scholar Nina Farnia. Welcome, Nina. Back for a second time. I guess you're a repeat offender now.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much. It's good to be back.
It's great to have you. And also radical psychologist and co-host of the YouTube band Resistance is Fertile podcast, Benji Schoendorff, also a repeat offender. Welcome back, Benji.
Thank you. It's great to be back. Thank you so much for having me back. And this panel is heaven.
Well, I mean, we'll have to deal with a lot of hell, but it is heaven to be with good comrades talking about it, at least. And we have roving left journalist and specialist on Latin America just returning from the global Samud flotilla, which she covered in person, Camila Escalante. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Nice to see you today.
Great. Welcome to you. And last but not least, writer, political commentator, and DJ radio host of Nihal to Bank on NTS Radio in London, Nihal El-Aasar. Welcome back to the program and to the first time to the struggle session.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you for coming late at night. I know it's a little late on a Sunday there, so we really appreciate you being with us for this conversation. I think I wanted to maybe, there's so many things to talk about. We could start, almost anywhere, but what, sort of top of mind for me right now, well, so many things are in my mind, but I just read about the 5th known attack the U.S. conducted on so-called narco-terrorists just yesterday. Or the day before in Caribbean waters since its first attack that we know of on September 5th. Since that time, at least 28 people have been killed. And during that time, somebody who seems to encourage and call for more of these kinds of attacks and destabilization of the Venezuelan government is somebody who just won the Nobel Peace Prize, Maria Corina Machado. So it seems like there's an awful lot to take stock of in the U.S. empire's involvement and engagement. This time, not abroad, but in the Monroe Doctrine zone, you might say, of historic U.S. intervention in the Western Hemisphere. And I'm wondering, what do you think is going on here? How should we analyze and understand these latest events? Is a more, I think Trump just announced recently that he was, that there had been some discussions with, the Venezuelan government, and that Maduro had made, various compromises. At any rate, it seems like there's a lot of focus right now in U.S. imperial interest, and I'm just wondering what you think is happening, how we should think about it, and what's on the horizon here. Who'd like to kind of weigh in? It looks like producer.
It seems like someone put me on. Well, I wanted to correct you because it seems that it is actually the 8th attack and the 7th, but possibly the 7th strike on a boat. But one of the boats, perhaps it was the 3rd attack on a vessel at sea, did not result in a massacre. It resulted in some sort of interdiction in the high waters, in the high sea. The others, one of which was just, I believe, made known today, resulted in multiple people killed. Of now, we can say at least 4 nationalities. So in addition to Venezuelans, Colombians confirmed to have been killed, people from Trinidad and Tobago confirmed to have been killed, and at least one person who was on one of the vessels attacked this week is an Ecuadorian citizen who now the United States has said is being sent back to Ecuador. 2 people were killed on that illegal strike in the middle of the sea this week, and then 2 people were said to have been rescued, which is completely bizarre because this is all being done using the pretext that these are narco terrorists, using the designations that the Trump administration has assigned to these different organizations, which one of them is not even a real existing organization, which is the Cartel de los Soles. It's a complete fabrication, and that has been clarified by the former UN drugs chief, who is also the former Deputy Secretary General to the UN, who has given several interviews in recent weeks talking about how a lot of this is just a complete fabrication by Marco Rubio and Trump. This is not a real existing criminal organization that has appeared in any of the data used to make any of the main drug reporting reports that we see that have been emitted on a regular basis, annual, if not every couple of years, by the United Nations itself, by the EU, by the DEA, and of course the State Department, or any other reputable organization. And so what has happened is that the United States has said that President Nicolas Maduro and his government have some sort of control, or that they are the leaders of the Cartel de los Soles and the Tren de Aragua. Venezuela has in fact eradicated Tren de Aragua from its territory and has done a great deal of work in trying to eradicate narco trafficking from its territory in general, given that it has the misfortune of being the neighbor of Colombia, the greatest cocaine producer in the world, which is the greatest producer of illicit coca crops, and then converts those illicit coca crops into cocaine paste and then ships it around the world through every direction of its national territory. Of course, the majority of which goes through the Pacific route up to the United States through Mexico, and currently is going through Ecuador, where there's complete lawlessness because Ecuador is an actual narco state. And so, what has happened in the last 24 hours is really important, because now it has been confirmed through multiple testimonies and witnesses that, in fact, the second strike on a boat in the Caribbean Sea was conducted against a Colombian boat in most likely Colombian waters and killed at least one Colombian citizen, but 3 people were killed on that boat. So it seems very likely that all 3 of them could have been Colombian. And now the US president is going back and forth with President Petro and saying that Petro himself is a drug leader and facilitates all of this, even though Colombia has historically had this problem of narco trafficking, and Gustavo Petro himself has tried very hard to eradicate this by all sorts of counter narcotics and economic measures to try to replace coca growing with other sorts of substitutes. And unfortunately, or maybe for the better, Colombia is being dragged into this. But it's really important to say that countries such as Trinidad and Tobago and its prime minister and the president of Guyana and other Caribbean and Latin American leaders have actually allowed the staging of this US military buildup on their territories. And this threatens peace for all of us in Latin America and the Caribbean. It presents a great threat that Colombia continues to host military bases and allow the US agencies and Southcom to use its territory for war. And it seems that although CARICOM, the Caribbean community, has put out some lukewarm statements, that they have not stood firm against the U.S. Using its territories for this military buildup. It's extremely dangerous what's happening, but we're not seeing sufficient united efforts to confront the U.S. and say that they're absolutely that they should absolutely not be coming into our region in this way.
Yeah, anybody else want to comment further? That was an excellent roundup, and I'm glad. I thought it was at least 5, but that's really important to document that it's more than that. Who else would like to discuss U.S. involvement and relations to Venezuela, as well as these other countries in the region?
Yeah, maybe I'd like to make a general point from a kind of more psychological perspective. In a sense, Camila gave us an amazing, detailed roundup of the material situation on the ground. But I think we also have to look at it from the perspective of empire, which these days has really invested the narrative field and narrative warfare as if it was most of what it was doing. And when we look at, in particular, Trump's discourse, we have to see that this guy is not using language like other people are. Like yesterday was talking about they were going to put stealth on B-52s, which is of course totally physically impossible, but it's just making shit up all the time. And now he's going to go and defend Palestinians from Hamas, and everything is just a complete lie. And we don't actually know if he's going to go after Venezuela or if this is all something to coup Petro. We have no idea what is going on in that sense. And when that happens, I go back to Martyr Bassel El-Araj's 8 rules of resistance. And the number 1 rule, which I think is super important to remember, is not to believe any information until it is confirmed by the resistance. So in that instance, I would look to listen to what the Venezuelan government is saying and go with that, because everything that comes out of this empire is just theater, smoke and mirrors, and not just what the empire do, but what this controlled opposition, these no kings demos, they've invented demos now with no demands, guarantees of no violence, no civil disobedience when they're screeching about encroaching fascism and authoritarianism, and they do demos that mean nothing anymore. So we need to keep our feet on the ground and remember that what comes out of this empire, of all its different mouthpieces, is just narrative nonsense.
I'll jump in now. Thank you both, and it's really great to be on with everybody. Thank you for having me back. I think the situation is extraordinarily serious, and it's almost scary that there aren't protests or any kind of like collective response. In fact, in the U.S., the collective there's been absolutely no collective response except to criminalize Maduro in the same way that Bashar al-Assad was criminalized, and in the same way that, for those that are old enough to remember, Saddam Hussein was criminalized before the invasion of Iraq. Though Maduro is not comparable to them because Maduro is a socialist, and he has been trying as part of the Bolivarian revolution to socialize the Venezuelan economy, and many aspects of it have been socialized for a while now. I think it's important also to, I know I should say first that, instead of having massive anti-war protests yesterday, there were massive no kings protests across the United States. And if you look at the images from, it's great that the U.S. is protesting whatever, but if you look at the images of the protests, they're filled. Hello, am I still on?
Yeah,
the screen just went blank. Okay, so they were filled with American flags, and there was no mention of U.S. imperialism, no mention of U.S. warfare, no mention of the ongoing genocide in Palestine, despite the quote-unquote ceasefire. No mention. And the reality is that you can't separate or disaggregate what's happening inside the U.S. from the fall of the empire. After the 12-day war, and this is just a short example, the 12-day war against Iran, the US-Israeli war against Iran, the US had lost at least 25% of its THAAD interceptors in that war. And that's what we know. There are also a whole host of other weaponry and machinery and defense systems that were lost as that are in serious decline as a result of that war, as a result of the NATO-led war on Ukraine, and as a result of the Israeli genocide in Palestine. And part of what we're seeing now is an effort for the US to try to rebuild its weapon systems. It doesn't have access to the minerals, the rare earth minerals that it needs to do so. 2 weeks ago or 10 days ago, China instituted export controls on its rare earths, prompting Trump to then announce 100% tariffs on China. I don't even know the status of those 100% tariffs, but the export controls are still in place. Venezuela, and I think it was shot under Chavez, they discovered a massive coltan reserve. Coltan is used to produce tantalum. I think that's how you pronounce it, Tantalum, which is necessary for American weapon systems. The US doesn't have massive rare earth reserves, rare earth mineral reserves, the way several other countries around the world do. So part of what we're seeing is actually an effort for the US to be able to sort of go back into its so-called backyard and exploit it at extreme levels, so that then it can rebuild the strength, the material strength, the resource strength to wage war throughout the world and take hold of its empire, which is in decline. Like, this effort is not going to work out, right? It's not going to work out, even if it's able to take some steps forward in the short term. The fact of the matter is that uh, the U.S. no longer has the material basis to control the world.
Exactly.
And so these wars, I think we're going to see accelerated short wars, sequential wars, right? Back-to-back wars. They're going to be short. They're going to be very hot. They're going to be dangerous. Hopefully they won't have, Venezuela will not become Syria, will not become Iraq. Venezuela will stand on its feet. The people of Venezuela will protect the Bolivarian revolution. The people of the region will do what they can to protect the region, because if Venezuela falls, whatever the disagreements are between the countries in the region, and they are many, but if Venezuela falls, it's one of the last strongholds, anti-imperialist strongholds in the region. If Venezuela falls, the rest of the region is going to become further weakened. And it's also going to amount to a massive refugee crisis for the whole region. So whoever is watching this and should be deeply concerned that there's no massive outcry against this. And they should be deeply concerned about what could happen if the US actually invades. And my understanding is that the CIA, the CIA has been active there for decades, right? We know that. But the CIA is in, it seems like. The deployment in the region is like, I think I read last week, 10% of US naval assets are located in the Caribbean, in that tiny, tiny area. This is catastrophic for the region. And that includes Florida. It includes the southern Florida and New Orleans and the southern United States. That whole region is also implicated in this. And if people in that area think that they're not going to be touched by a war in the Caribbean, they are out of their minds. They are out of their minds.
Yeah, I want to talk a bit about this thread of the Nobel Peace Prize and who it's given to, or the Nobel Prize in general, because in the peace plan that was had in Sharm el-Sheikh, we saw President Sisi keep hinting very heavily at Trump that he should get the Nobel Peace Prize. There's all of this discourse online that Trump really wanted the Nobel Peace Prize, and then when he didn't get it, and when Maria got it, there's all of these liberal commentators who were making these jokes as if Trump would be upset or he'd throw a fit, as if this isn't exactly part of the plan, or as if Trump wouldn't have been really happy that someone who would further the US's imperialist agenda in Latin America would have gotten this prize. And we know previously, like, a lot of people are saying, oh, they're really audacious this year. They gave the Peace Prize to like, they really don't care. But this has been the history of the Nobel Prize in general. Like, for example, in 1976, the Nobel Prize for Economics was given to Milton Friedman, for one of the Chicago boys, for devising, the new liberal policies, the extreme shock doctrine that was applied in Chile that resulted in the death of Salvador Allende, and that saw a lot of the people of Chile got unprecedented repression. And then the following year, Amnesty International got the Nobel Peace Prize for covering, this repression in Chile, without mentioning that it was the extremely unpopular neoliberal policies that led to that. And they didn't even mention that they gave Milton Friedman the economics prize, the Nobel Economics Prize. And it's really interesting how this Nobel Prize is a tool wielded by empire to further its imperialist goals, whether in Latin America or elsewhere. My question then is to Camila or Nina, or or anyone else, like how serious do you think this encroachment on Venezuela's sovereignty is this time? Like, we know previously there's been attempts at regime change in Venezuela with Juan Guaido, and these attempts have failed. So what makes this time different?
Well, I wanted to queue up a clip that we produced on Calcutta News, and it's a very important statement by David Abdullah, who is one of the founders of the Assembly of Caribbean Peoples in Trinidad and Tobago. The Assembly of Caribbean Peoples consists of social movements from different countries of the Caribbean, and they have a very strong position on what has taken place, and they actually made their pronouncement back at the end of August when all of this started. And they gathered outside of the U.S. Embassy just a few days ago, and I requested this footage from our press colleagues at CNC or CNC3 Trinidad and Tobago, and they sent me the raw footage because they, of course, don't air all of this on the news networks. But this was a number of people who came out to the U.S. Embassy to protest this military buildup and protest the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, which is not standing up. It is, in fact, inviting the U.S. to come and stage this aggression from Trinidadian soil. He spoke. This was actually about 25 minutes, just him speaking. There were other speakers as well about what their analysis of the situation is and their demands. Their demands are for CARICOM heads to come together to actually address the situation, not put out these very lukewarm statements about zone of peace. And so I wanted to listen to that clip because it's very important to know that while for so long, Venezuelans have been criminalized, and the left in Latin America has been criminalized and made, this imposed association with drug trafficking, starting with the way in which the ELN and the FARC were previously linked to illegal activity in Colombia. That has stretched all around our continent, and it's an ongoing campaign to try to slander the Bolivarian Revolution, the government of President Nicolas Maduro, and the Venezuelan people, including criminalizing people in the United States who are of Latin American origin, and specifically Venezuelans, and linking them to the Tren de Aragua and all these other criminal networks. And through that, they have, in fact, rounded people up, deported them, and put them in the Secot in El Salvador, and subjected them to torture without any trial. And so this is a continuation of that. Suddenly, people in the Caribbean are coming together, they're meeting, they're talking, and they're saying, this actually affects us as well. Our territories are being used for this. This is making our region of the Caribbean unsafe. People who live in coastal communities who rely on fishing for their income are unsafe. People rely on tourism income, and that's on the water. They're literally carrying out drone strikes and extrajudicial killings just all around the region. And there are 10,000 troops and all sorts of large military equipment being poured into this region. And for what? Obviously, at this point, we're just in a pre-war scenario. So this has been a part of their response on a day in which they carried out simultaneous actions in many of the Caribbean countries in response to what's been happening.
I could report that there are people in Aruba, Barbados, Belize, Cuba, Curacao, Dominica, Grenada, Guadeloupe, Guyana, Haiti, Jamaica, Martinique, Puerto Rico, Republic of Dominica, Dominican Republic, St. Lucia, St. Martin, St. Vincent, Suriname, as well as us here in Trinidad and Tobago, who are doing something to make this collective call for the Caribbean to be a zone of peace. This declaration was a call to the people of the Caribbean that we must stand firm, that the Caribbean must remain a zone of peace, that there should be no U.S. intervention. We declare that the sovereignty of the nation states of our region is not and must not be up for sale, that regional unity and integration are crucial to our development and survival in the context of a changing global order, and therefore call on CARICOM heads of government to meet urgently on this emerging situation and to adopt a unified position against this unilateral military deployment by the US. We denounce the so-called creation by the US of an international coalition against narco-trafficking, as it is the seed of an alliance of a minority of states in this hemisphere that will be used to create some cloak of legality under the OAS to intervene in Venezuela, as was attempted and failed through the so-called Lima Group. And we further call on these governments not to allow the US to use their countries as a military staging point to attack any sovereign state, and in this instance, Venezuela. We denounce the extrajudicial killings that the US claimed it carried out of 11, of course that now has gone up to more than 27, suspected narco traffickers, and insist that the stopping of the trafficking of drugs, humans, and arms must be done through interdiction and the legal process, with the criminals tried in courts of law and convicted on the basis of evidence seized. And we deplore the statements made that they should, quote, all be killed violently, as contrary to the rule of law, and thus which could take us down a slippery slope of giving the state the license to kill arbitrarily. The designation by the US, without providing a shred of evidence that the president of Venezuela is the head of a narco-trafficking gang, is part of the well-known operation to discredit and delegitimize a leader or country. The US has no moral authority to speak about narco-trafficking when it was engaged in precisely such activity to finance the violent civil wars in El Salvador and Nicaragua in the 1980s that resulted in many tens of thousands of people being killed, among other well-documented activities. Nor does it have any moral authority to speak about peace when it is complicit in the genocide of Palestinians today and of many other crimes against humanity through the years. The sovereignty of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela must be respected, and that therefore we oppose any military intervention by the US or any other state in Venezuela.
Wow, what a brilliant statement. That is absolutely amazing. I'm so glad you brought that clip to our attention. A very clear statement. As somebody in the chat said, they should hopefully go further and make more careful and closely connected alliances to resist U.S. imperial influence in the region. I also just wanted to pick up on something, Nihal mentioned about the bankruptcy of course, the Nobel Peace Prize. But, even before the case that she mentioned starting in 1975, in 1973, Henry Kissinger was awarded the Peace Prize, for ending the Vietnam War, which embarrassingly only ended in 1975. So, he was awarded it for a war that they then continued to escalate for a while, merely for demonstration effect, in order to, demonstrate that they would still be, behind their ally, the corrupt regime in South Vietnam at the time. And this reminds me also, Nihal mentioned that people expected Donald Trump, who evidently has a great interest in being awarded this Peace Prize. And it just reminds us of the absolutely abject statements by the current Prime Minister of Pakistan at the recent Sharm el-Sheikh conference around implementation of the so-called peace plan for Gaza, where this Shehbaz Sharif really demeaned not only himself but his entire country by making absolutely ridiculous and obsequious remarks about what a great peacemaker Donald Trump is. So when you mentioned that the these are responses and reactions we're seeing in U.S. domestic politics, and of course, greater focus, perhaps you might say, on the Western Hemisphere for U.S. empire, because it is overstretched and it is collapsing and declining in terms of its ability to control, the globe hegemonically in ways that perhaps it thought it could, or at least had a better chance of doing so in earlier stages. At the same time, it is an extremely dangerous moment, because the kind of reaction that a failing imperial power has is even more crude, brutal, and violent. In just the same way, when it was so-called ending after basically having to admit defeat in Vietnam, it went on a massive bombing spree as a kind of final spasm of imperial, demonstration of its power. And we saw the same thing, the way Israel, of course, it had its strategic objectives in trying to expropriate more land from the Palestinians, but it also needed, because it is like the United States, propped up entirely, it seems, on a military industrial complex that relies, as Anthony Lowenstein has mentioned in his excellent book, The Palestine Laboratory, that their economy revolves around being able to promote and sell their technology, their surveillance, their military arms as battle tested, right? That they've used it, they've proved it, and their domination of the region and the Palestinians is crucial in the marketing of their industry. And so when, it was exposed for its weakness, that has led to extreme violence. And so we are living in a period where we have to be very aware that the declining empire doesn't mean that because it is failing, that it is any less dangerous, bloodthirsty, and destructive. And it's really about trying to manage this decline so that the rest of the global south, the world, the people of the world can survive, the morbidity, you could say, of this failing empire. But that raised a number of other topics. Let's see. Let's take a look at this clip.
Brought not only peace in South Asia, saved millions of people, their lives, and today, here in Sharm el-Sheikh, achieving peace in Gaza is saving millions of lives in the Middle East. Mr. President, I would like to salute you for your exemplary leadership, visionary leadership, and I think that you're the man this world needed most at this point in time. World would always remember you as a man who did everything, went out of the way to stop 7 and today 8 wars. Wonderful candidate.
Well, see, that's the clip, the embarrassing clip that is scandalizing people in Pakistan. And I do want to just sort of conclude some of these remarks by pointing out that there's a very big story that's taking place right now in Pakistan. I don't know if people have been following it, whether we want to discuss it, but scores of protesters have been killed under this government that is, really, is there any way to say other than that it's an illegal government that came in by, coup and election manipulation, this last year, basically because, it would do the bidding of Pakistan's military, which is basically doing the bidding of the U.S., empire in the region. And, there's some sense that there's deep frustration and extreme concern that Pakistan, which has, steadfastly refused to recognize the state of Israel, even if it's not so close that it's been in a position to offer support and aid to the Palestinian people in a direct way, but it has always maintained diplomatically this strong position that there is some rumors circulating that obsequious and debased performance by the current prime minister is basically an advance theatrical performance before joining the Abraham Accords, and following the Gulf countries that it's very sort of dependent upon. So that's a real concern as well in Pakistan, and it's led to massive protests, among other issues. Of course, the mismanagement of the economy, frustration with this, illegitimate government. But that is something that has also touched a real nerve in the political culture in Pakistan, and it's led to scores of people being killed by security forces in Pakistan. But anyway, I want to open the floor for others to talk about any of the variety of issues that these recent remarks by the last few panelists touches upon.
Yeah, I think we need to remember that consciousness arises from material condition and political economy. And what we have today is an empire that is economically, militarily, technologically, and also morally, after 2 years of livestream genocide, on its last legs. And all it has is the bluster of the bully that's losing its grip. And what we're seeing everywhere is like, whether it was in the so-called parliament of the entity or in Sharm el-Sheikh, was actually a collective humiliation ritual is what we saw, right? And there is no way those folks who participated in it didn't hate being humiliated that way in public. Did you everybody saw, of course, my old roommate Keir Starmer being, where is he? Didn't remember his name. Always behind you. And the one from the guy from the UAE, did you see? Oh, your shoes, lots of cash. And the 60 billion of Miriam Adelson, all of this is a sign that this empire, it really is on its last leg. It's like a narcissistic system. When the narcissist sees their power, their psychological power being threatened, and they up the ante and they up the show, but everybody looks cowed, but inside they're just waiting for the whole thing to fall. And it cannot but help to make all these missteps. Like, it wants to use Trinidad and Tobago as a base, and then the next day it drones Trinidadian civilians. It keeps on doing these things. It wants to send Tomahawks to Ukraine and then realizes it doesn't have them anymore. It's got a boutique, high-tech military industrial complex when China and Russia have them. China now have them in robotic factories that work 24/7. And Russia kept the Soviet, extra capacity for producing weapons, and they're also running 24/7. And now there comes this rare earth problem, and they just don't have them anymore. And China are just going, well, we're not going to sell them to you. You said you wanted to use them to make war on us, so we're just not going to sell them to you. And so it's making, it's producing all these incredible string of psyops. And another one is Trump pretending that Maduro was willing to sell the country down the river, hoping that maybe people in Venezuela will believe it and go, oh, if Maduro is willing to sell us down, we're not going to resist. But it won't go the way they want it to go. And maybe there are a couple of adults left in the Pentagon, but I don't think they will actually go in Venezuela, or if they do go, it won't go the way they think it's going to go. I think the correct position is the one that this spokesperson of the group was saying in the video, and to just stand against war, remind the history of this empire. We learned more about Zionism in the past 2 years than ever. The world learned more, and now we need to learn more. We need to learn about the narco state is the US. Marco Rubio used to be called Narco Rubio for very good reasons. It wasn't just in the 80s that the CIA organized drugs coming into the US and all over the world. It's been since the creation of the CIA in 1947, and it's still going on. So, those of us on social media need to do this education thing. We need to go, look, this information, look at this, look at that. put all this information out, and not the kind of information that goes, oh my God, the empire is going to crush Venezuela under its foot in 2 days, which they want us to believe, because there is absolutely no sign of this at this point. And you see the Venezuelan population mobilizing, millions of people under arms, and it's not going to go the way it went. You know, what do they have more that they didn't have with Trump 1.0? They actually have fewer weapons. Their navy has been defeated by the poorest country in the world, being Yemen. They didn't dare to really go head to toe against Iran. You know, they telephoned the strikes and they just arranged no escalation. So I think a lot of it is bluster and psyops, and we need to see it as it is. We need to take a step back and look at this spectacle and go, it's not just us, we're not crazy. This is like a clown show and everybody knows it, even the people who are part of it. And this is kind of how we must look at it. Of course, it's a deadly clown show, and it will kill more and it will genocide more and it will continue on this path. But at the same time, it's not the bulldozer that it wants us to believe it is, both on the narrative level and even less so at the material level. So it's very important, I believe, to remember that, because when we analyze, when we talk about what's going on, when we think about what this could mean, really healthy to take a step back, because they want us to face plant all the time. Did you hear what he said? No, I don't believe it. Did you hear what he said? Oh, how did he treat the prime minister of this and the prime minister of that said this? And as we do this, we kind of get, a little bit confused by all this spectacle. When we step back, we go, yeah, this is just, a clown show on its last leg. That was me trying to rant, as you know.
Yeah, to continue on this thread of spectacle, in the absence of real sovereignty in the region and the Arab world, you could see already some people in Egypt use the fact that, firstly, the ceasefire was signed in Egypt, the ceasefire deal, and then that the peace accords were the so-called peace plan was the peace meeting was had in Egypt, as a sign that, Egypt's sovereignty is somehow being regained, or it's a sign of, the strength of the Egyptian state. And in one way, yes, it's a spectacle. And yes, just because the ceasefire deal was signed in Egypt rather than Qatar, doesn't mean that it was Egypt that forced the ceasefire to happen. So yeah, in one way, it is a spectacle. But in another way, yes, it is a sign that, a country like Egypt is stronger than we thought it was, but it's not the strength I want. What we see happening is this kind of infighting in this area between Egypt and Qatar and Saudi Arabia and the UAE on who gets to be the favorite comprador, on who gets to be the most, the strongest comprador to the US. And for the Saudi Arabia and for the UAE, whose existence basically was primed to be that, and whose wealth always grew in line with US imperialism, and who are always kind of the enemies of any progressive forces in the Arab region, that is expected. But the tragedy here is that for a country like Egypt, with its historic role, is that it sees the height of its ambition in this moment as just being being more useful to imperialism in some way, and it's kind of fighting for crumbs at the table. And obviously it's by design, because this regime was it derives its legitimacy from the US. It would fall immediately if it didn't get US support. But it was able to maneuver this genocide in a way to get itself out of the crisis that it was in. Firstly, the crisis that the displacement, if there was Palestinian displacement in Egypt, that would have caused something we'd never seen before in the region. And And if Egypt had been bombed like Qatar, that would have also caused a crisis in the military itself, possibly with a coup happening. So the fact that it was able to pull this peace agreement off kind of like signal to the people who have their heads in the sand that, you know, we have things under control for now. You can keep on ignoring what's happening, or you know, you can use this to say that the country isn't as bad as it is. But obviously it is all a spectacle. Like before, oh yeah, they were also saying that it's a success that Sisi managed to get Trump to visit Egypt while refusing to go to America before and get a dressing down like Zelensky got before. But you know, how did he get Trump to Egypt? By rolling out the red carpet, by making it the Trump festival, by flying F-15 planes next to Air Force One as Air Force One was landing in Sharm el-Sheikh, by having the US crest on the podium instead of the Egyptian one, by making it the Trump festival. And before
United
Trump
Kingdom, where's United?
Yeah.
United Kingdom, where's United Kingdom? Where's my friend? Where? Come here. Is everything going good? Very good. That's good. Nice of you here. These people all came in like 20-minute notice, and I think it's fantastic. And we have so many others, and just so many others. And
yeah, so you see in this video, he's humiliating even Keir Starmer in this way that we've been accustomed to, this term that he's humiliating the allies. So he asks where the UK is. Starmer raises his hand expecting to say something, and then he tells him to go back. And you know, he takes it and it's fine. But yeah, before Trump gets to Egypt, he was in Israel, in occupied Palestine, saying, oh, you know, you asked for weapons, we gave you weapons, and you used them well. And then he said, I'm late to the peace summit. The rich leaders must have gone home. It's only the poor leaders who are still there, like making fun of this spectacle. But then you see them still pull out the red carpet for him and like have this humiliating display under the pretense that they're cajoling a child to make him agree to peace in Gaza.
Well, I know we want to move on to other things, but I wanted to respond to some of what we've been hearing in the mainstream media and the Miami media with regards to what's going on in Venezuela. We've been hearing these claims that I have tried really hard to just ignore and not give a platform to, because as I think someone mentioned, there's always there are always people who perhaps inadvertently in a situation like this give a platform to the enemy's messaging, in this case, the imperialist messaging, which is relying on U.S. intelligence operations, which is using, employing psychological operations against or on Venezuelans within Venezuela, but as well as trying to confuse the rest of us on the exterior about what's going on. And one of the things that they have been claiming in the big media is that President Maduro and his government are negotiating with the U.S. or actually begging the U.S. with Venezuelan resources and possible contracts with Chevron. And they even said that Delcy Rodriguez, the first vice president of Venezuela, and Jorge Rodriguez, who is currently the president of the National Assembly of Venezuela, formerly was a very important minister of communication. And he's also the chief negotiator of the Venezuelan government in the instances in which they've had talks with the opposition and talks with the United States. They're trying, the US media and international media is trying to say that Venezuela is offering to have those two replace President Maduro and have President Maduro step down. It's just very important to say that that is categorically false. I can't begin to emphasize and stress how false that is. There have been operations after operations to try to remove President Maduro by coup, by assassination, by surgical removal, by invasion from Colombian territory. They had drills in Argentina. There were movements on the Brazilian border in 2019. There was coup attempts in 2019 and 2020 within Venezuela. There was sabotage to vital infrastructure within the country that has been that the United States and its allies within Venezuela and the Venezuelan far-right opposition on the exterior have since admitted to publicly that they were behind the huge attacks on the electrical grid in Venezuela. And there, of course, was the false flag Cucuta scandal where they pretend to be taking aid and there was no aid at all whatsoever on the Colombian border when they tried to invade Venezuela during Trump's previous term. They have tried to bribe every single high-ranking member of the Bolivarian National Armed Forces of Venezuela to turn on the president, in addition to every single advisor and cabinet member. They have put tons of money in front of them. And Marco Rubio himself, who was there dictating and live tweeting every single coup attempt that they have made in the last several years, he was actually saying at the time, every time they were doing this, that they knew of a whole log full of members, of high-ranking members of the Bolivarian National Armed Forces who were defecting, and they didn't defect. It didn't happen. The coup never happened. Internally, there were all sorts of ways in which they have paid people, the guarimbas, in April 2017 for a period of 3 months. The guarimbas showed up in other instances as well to try to cause terrorism on the streets, to try to incite violence, and all sorts of other endless operations, even before the supposed current CIA authorization to carry out operations within Venezuela that we're talking about now in the news cycle. It's been happening all along. And guess what? They have not been able to overthrow President Maduro. They weren't able to overthrow Chavez post 2002. And none of this has worked. And they have poured billions of dollars, millions, hundreds of millions of dollars at least into it. And Nihal talked about Maria Corina Machado and this Nobel Peace Prize. You know what the job of a Venezuelan opposition person is? What is it to be a far-right opposition person in Latin America or a far-right leader? It is not someone who governs. It's not someone, in the case of Venezuela, it's not someone who holds any political power in the country at all whatsoever. So they're not a governor of anything. They're not a high-ranking or important political leader in any sort of way. This is someone who, as a career, goes and seeks money from the United States government or Western governments to try to continue their ongoing and permanent campaign to destabilize and coup their country. And in this case, who campaigns for US military intervention or a war on their own people, and previous to this current time, has been lobbying up and down all of the West for sanctions, unilateral coercive measures by the thousands against these their very own people, because they want to see them die by starvation and disease. This is what they do through the human rights industry, the fake human rights industry, and they are going to all of these different international organizations or fronts or whatever they are, and they're taking hundreds of thousands of dollars as their own salary or whatever to try to do this sort of work. They're not real political leaders. They're certainly not elected officials. And we saw that during the time when they erected this fake parallel government, when they erected this fake person, president of Narnia, Juan Guaido, he didn't actually hold any political power. At no point during that however many years, when he said he was the president of something, did he command over any government institution or any part of the country? Not the state media, not the armed forces, not the police, not the anything, absolutely nothing. He was the previous head of the National Assembly from 2015, and they're all of a sudden say he was the president. There's just no reason. It has failed. Every coup attempt has failed in Venezuela. It has become a country of peace where there's no longer guarimbas, there's no longer terrorism on the streets. They have territorial control. There's no vacuum of power, and so there's nothing there for the U.S. to do. So there's no reason why President Maduro would feel insecure. He's come very far. They have overcome so much. And so they are not trying to sell off their resources or any part of the country, because that would defeat the entire purpose. The entire purpose of what they're trying to do is maintain their national sovereignty, protect the Bolivarian Revolution, and offer protection to the rest of the region, the whole Caribbean region, the other revolutionary processes in the region. They're actually fighting for the very existence of Latin America and our borders itself, because the US is trying to do away with the existing borders, and they're trying to create vacuums. They're trying to create areas of total lawlessness where they can install a leader who will just auction off the resources of the country, but also where any power can just come in, or any person or any paramilitary, and start operating on pieces of land. They want everything to become the complete shithole that Ecuador is becoming right now, which is under a huge national strike because they have a US puppet leader. They want to turn it into what they've done to Syria and Libya, and unfortunately, in some sense, Haiti as well. That is what they want for Venezuela, and they know that it can have a domino effect if they strike at the heart of what is ALBA, what is, all of the sort of unity that exists, or the rule of law and everything else that exists in Latin America right now, which has been largely free of major conflicts for a long time. They believe, the United States believes, that it can do away with that, and it can end that and just create total chaos. And so I just wanted to play this clip. One of the instances recently, last week, when the permanent representative of Venezuela, Ambassador Samuel Moncada, spoke at the Security Council. This is at the stakeout, and he is addressing some of these claims that simply, maybe go ahead and play it, because there's a couple of clips. I want to make sure I have the right one. But he's
have been willing to sell our oil to anybody who pays for it at the right price. But the idea that Venezuelan oil belongs to the US and only American companies can work in Venezuela is ridiculous. We are an open market, an open territory. People come to buy, we sell, no problem whatsoever. But I have seen these rumors and reports that we are almost giving away our oil only to get some promises of pardon, or not even peace, that they are not going to attack us if we give away our resources. That's ridiculous. I mean, the only way to get our oil is to pay for it, and we will sell it to anyone. I mean, we are willing to deal with the United States, but on these market terms like any other country. No more than that. There is nothing special. I mean, we are not asking for some kind of protection in swapping protection for oil. That's not what we are trying to do here.
So maybe we can hear from Nina, but I just wanted to, that's one of the different things that they're saying, that Venezuela is essentially fighting for its life. That is absolutely false. Right now, this weekend, just to give a little bit of context about what's going on in Venezuela, they're celebrating a national holiday. They declared a holiday right now for the canonization of two Catholic figures of Venezuela, the first to be canonized. I don't know much about Catholicism, but there's this big event going on at the Vatican right now, and the leaders, the political leaders of Venezuela, and all the people throughout all of the country are actually sitting around and watching this take place in the Vatican. This is what it's a country of peace. They are, they have to just go on with their lives despite that they have this huge, massive military buildup surrounding the entire country, which is just absolutely deplorable. It needs to be fought and rejected by everyone in our region, but of course in the United States as well. But they are not begging for any sort of, as Ambassador Samuel Moncada said, they're not begging for some sort of pardon. They're not trying to, no, they're standing up to defend their country from gross imperialism, and they're not going to back down. If they have to go to war, they will.
That was really powerful, Camila, and I really appreciate everything you just said, and also agree with it. And on that note of Venezuela's strength, I think it's been like decades now that they've been trying to topple the Chavez government, followed by the Maduro government, and the Bolivarian revolutionary process, and they have not been able to do it. And the presumption that Venezuela is a lot of folks are saying, well, Venezuela is strong at the grassroots level, right? Because a lot of people have now enlisted into the popular militia in order to defend their country. But we also actually don't know how strong it is militarily. Venezuela has practiced incredible discipline and has not exposed its capabilities, even though it's been getting its boats or its people have been getting struck in its waters. So we actually don't know what capabilities Venezuela has. What we do know is that it is by and large a wealthy country, right? It is a highly resourced country. It has strong relationships with the most powerful, most militarized countries in the world right now, Russia and China and Iran, which all have very powerful weapons, as we've seen, as we've witnessed. So I don't think anybody should assume that this potential invasion is going to lead to a quick toppling of the Maduro government or a quick end to the Bolivarian revolution. That said, I do think the US, and this is to answer Nihal's question, I do think the US is serious. I do think the US is seriously exploring its options here. I don't know how much of its plan it's already executed, but nobody builds up in the region. Nobody uses this many of its resources to build up in a region that, and like what it's doing in the Caribbean, if it's not serious.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And so everybody, and Venezuela knows this, the regional actors all know this. Am I back?
You are back.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. I think everybody in the United States needs to take this very, very seriously. That if they can pull this off, they're going to do it. The only reason that they won't do it is if they discover through their intelligence that Venezuela's capabilities are far stronger than they thought, or if the people of Venezuela show them that they're not going to be able to take over that territory easily, that this could turn into a long, long war the way Iraq was, or various other parts of the world, Vietnam, right? And unlike Iraq and unlike Vietnam, we're talking about a country that is mere miles from the US border. So, and Puerto Rico is implicated here, right? Because Puerto Rico is right now functioning against the will of its people. It's functioning as a launch pad for this war. And so what the questions will rise if they invade Venezuela, what are the people of Puerto Rico going to do? How are they going to respond? So there are a lot of concerns that the US is facing, and it's not clear what Venezuela's capabilities are. if they don't invade, it will be because of the strength of the peoples of the region. That will be the reason they don't invade, nothing else. And should I turn to Egypt, or I just want to
If
touch
you'd
on
like,
Egypt for
go
a
ahead.
minute?
Yeah.
So the story of Egypt, the modern story of Egypt, is incredibly tragic, right? Egypt is the largest Arab nation in the region and possibly in the world, I think. And with the Camp David Accords in the 70s and the death of Abdel Nasser, before that, the resistance, the anti-imperialist resistance lost Egypt. And we haven't gotten Egypt back yet. And when George Abdullah was released from French prisons, the famous Lebanese fighter George Abdullah was released from French prisons a little while ago, he called on the Egyptians to rise up. And they have risen up, but they have faced extraordinary repression. This is a serious problem. The question of Egypt is a serious problem for the region. On the other hand, the fact of the matter is, as Nihal said, that Egypt, the Sisi government, or regime, could not exist without the US. It's a complete patron of the US. And so as the US continues its fall, I think opportunities will emerge in the region and in the Arab nations of the region. And hopefully, uh, the peoples of those nations, as they start to lose, as the states start to lose their relationship with the United States because the US is too weak, the peoples of the region will be able to take back control of their sovereignty and their lives. But Egypt, the exit of Egypt from the resistance, Sayed Hassan Nasrallah called it the Egyptian exit. It has been catastrophic for the region. And I think we should keep our eyes on Egypt, especially after that Sharm el-Sheikh spectacle that we all were forced to witness last week.
I'm wondering if, Nihal, you want to follow up there on that.
Yeah.
You said something really interesting on the office hours we had a couple weeks ago about the defeat of Egypt not being the death of Gamal Abdel Nasser itself, but rather the capitulation, really, of Anwar Sadat. Of course, one follows from the other, but that's really, what seals the real exit of Egypt, you could say, from really confronting Zionist colonialism and U.S. colonialism and imperialism in the region. But what thoughts did you have about that?
Yeah, so that's a crucial question, the question of Egypt. And since October 7th, Egypt's kind of like existential position vis-a-vis Israel and the so-called peace accords with Israel, the Camp David Accords, that have not trickled down to the population even 50 years after they were signed, have been brought to the forefront, that they're really artificial and that the existence of Israel on Egypt's borders is what has de-developed Egypt so much, what has caused all of the impoverishment, what has, brought Egypt's potential back. And a lot of commentators, actually, like writing from Egypt and outside, have said that the era of Camp David has ended already. That Israel ended the era of Camp David with this current genocide, but that the Egyptian regime has not realized that yet and is trying to maintain it while Israel has ended it. And if it's not ending, then it's in its twilight era. And what Sisi and the Egyptian regime is doing right now is trying to kind of, we're seeing with Trump, is trying to kind of like plead and hold on to and like maneuver and try to maintain it. And I don't know how sustainable that is, because what we're seeing already, like scenes of, the Egyptian state has moved completely. The Egyptian military has turned inwards, and its primary goal is to stop Egyptians from organizing, whether it's like, we're not even talking about political parties, we're talking about football associations, neighborhood committee, like nothing is too small. And it's mad to think a country of 120 million people cannot organize themselves even in small ways because the threat is too extreme. And what we're seeing right now, we're seeing recently that the exiled Palestinian political prisoners have gone to Egypt. A lot of, you know, people from Gaza, like after paying a heavy cost, have gone to Egypt as well. And Egyptians are interacting with them. But the state is also trying to stop that. Like we're seeing when journalist Salah al-Jafarawi was murdered, his family announced the next day that his funeral will be held at a mosque in Egypt, in Cairo. And then there was an outpouring of interactions with that post. It got thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of interactions. And then the family posted on the same day that the funeral was canceled because obviously the state pressured them. So even the kind of like attendance of a funeral of this beloved figure from Gaza would be considered a threat to the Egyptian state. But we're still seeing young people go and like welcome all of the prisoners. The prisoners are interacting with them. There's one lovely video of novelist and prisoner Bassem Khandakshi walking across the Nile, taking a selfie video of himself saying how great it is to be on the Nile, how amazing it is to be walking in Egypt. And then someone recognizes him in a taxi and he's like, Bassem, congrats on your freedom. And you could tell he really like beams and smiles. And you know, Mahmoud Al-Arda, the mastermind of the Gilboa prison break, also has made multiple videos praising the Egyptian people and saying that they will rise. So kind of like the Egyptians and the Gazans and the Palestinians are kind of joking, saying that these videos are kind of like a return of relations. But even like people who are, even Palestinians and people from Lebanon who are anti-Egypt are saying, have even expressed comments saying that it's good that the ceasefire agreement was signed in Egypt despite Sisi, because it's a return to Egypt's role as a central player in the Palestinian struggle rather than the Gulf, and that despite years of Sisi trying to dwarf Egypt's regional role, that it still forces itself due to the circumstance. Like you can't just isolate yourself from the Palestinian struggle because it is a part of the struggle for Egypt's sovereignty and dignity. So Sisi will go at some point, but the struggle will continue.
That's really interesting. And I think, of course, also it is interesting and important that, as you pointed out, the Sharm el-Sheikh, conference and the negotiations and signing of this took place in Egypt, returning it to a more prominent place in the regional politics rather than the Gulf. And I think, although maybe the era of the Camp David Accords is over, Israel still seems a little cautious and reluctant to remind Egypt that that is, in fact, the case through express demonstration. So I think there's some caution. They were not able to push the Palestinians into the Sinai, which is what they expect, to just simply begin pushing them through in that early sort of plan to create a new kind of refugee settlement in Sinai on the other side of Rafah, when Egypt said that they wouldn't accept that. That was something that was actually serious. So I think that's really interesting. There may be some signs. We obviously
just add a tiny bit to that.
Yeah.
It's because if Israel bombs Egypt, if Palestinians are pushed into Sinai, that just risks opening up the Egypt front again. So it's not out of the equation. And it's not for fear of Egypt. I think it is the US actually holding Israel back at this point. And I think this is a testament to, that Israel is not rogue. It is still controlled by the US, because from what we've seen and from like even Israelis dragging Sisi in press, even though he's the most complicit Egyptian president, their madness could lead them to bomb Egypt as like they did Qatar. But I think the U.S. recognizes that in doing so, or the threat of displacement of Palestinians in Egypt could lead to opening up the front, or could risk opening up the front again.
Well, or at least, I mean, even if Sisi himself wouldn't, respond because he's in the pocket of the U.S. and, relies on inhabiting that spot with U.S. Approbation, is that unlike a place like Qatar or these other, Gulf monarchies that have no real popular base, I mean, there's a huge population of people who might actually respond and, force a response, or if they don't get the response that, reflects national will, have a revolution again, like that's like an actual risk there. Whereas it's a minor risk in one of these small Gulf monarchies, where it's a very different kind of population and a very different kind of political situation. So I think that's quite interesting. Well, we are starting to come close to our 90 minutes, and I like to treat this like a football match. We do 90 minutes, maybe a little bit of extra time, but there was one other topic that I wanted to get to that is of interest. But before I do, I just wanted to say that I do pay a little bit of attention to what happens in the Catholic Church as a medieval historian. So I'm always interested to see, when there is, liberation theology being recognized in some capacity. And one of the two canonized Venezuelans that are being celebrated today in Vatican City under Pope Leo XIV's canonization is somebody known as the Doctor of the Poor, Jose Gregorio Hernandez, who it appears is revered by millions for his dedication to poor people and was declared a saint. And this is, I think, in some sense, a great sign of a socialist saint, basically, there in Venezuela, that is somebody who's very popular, who reflects the values of the Bolivarian Revolution, and you have a reinforcing, perhaps, of this culture of resistance through people's piety as well. And I think that's interesting because that's a kind of theme and a connection that I see also in parts of the anti-imperialist front in the Middle East, that without understanding at least some role that's being played by a kind of resistant form of Islam, it's very hard to really, conceptualize the duration and of this defiant resilience that we're seeing among, say, the Palestinian people. So that's a wonderful connection to think about, and maybe a topic for a future discussion is maybe thinking about liberation theology and Islamic liberation theology together. But I did want to come to one topic, which was about media and media censorship. We have a working journalist, somebody who also Nihal writes for a number of outlets. And we also have a victim of censorship. And, Resistance is Fertile podcast, which I highly recommend to everyone, which sees itself as a psychological support front for the resistance and has been doing wonderful work. I've been so privileged to be a guest on it myself and to have Benji on a couple of times on these struggle sessions and so forth, has been, canceled, banned, suppressed on YouTube, and is no longer on this space that we're right now having this discussion. And so I wanted to talk, both about that situation, but also broadly about the media environment. We see, for example, that during the live streaming of this genocide, more and more people turn to social media and alternative sources of news and have abandoned mainstream media that is clearly corrupted and suborned to imperialism and Zionism and so forth. But we see a response and a reaction that is increasing, even though, of course, we know these media platforms have done these kinds of banning. There have been at least some opportunity for these discussions. But look at TikTok being acquired now by, Larry Ellison. Look at what's happened at CBS. These are kind of obvious and dramatic efforts to try and reinforce the control over the media narrative that has clearly slipped out of the hands of Zionists and imperialists. And so this is an important and interesting moment to be thinking about, even on these platforms that are alternatives in social media, where people can make their own videos and get their story out and their experiences, which has been so important during the Gaza situation, to be able to have some genuine testimonies, since the media has been prevented from covering it, other than a few brave journalists already working inside Gaza. But people themselves have responded and are telling their stories on social media platforms. But even that is, contingent and under threat, as we see from the banning of Resistance is Fertile and many other examples. So I just wanted to open the floor for reflections at this particular moment, what kind of responses we can have, what we need to be watching for. Benji, you said from the very beginning, and Camila, you also reinforced with very specific points about not believing, the imperialist media and the kinds of stories that are basically part of psychological operations to undermine the resistance. So, how should we be responding to this changing media landscape? And
so
yeah, go ahead, Benji.
If I may say a few words about this. So in my conversation with Charlotte Cates from Samidun, she brought up these 2 points that I think are really central. One is they're trying to delegitimize resistance, and that's the narrative war, and that's the one that's aimed at us Westoids. And the other one is the actual armed resistance. And of course, we're not participating in the armed resistance, but we are the battlefield for this delegitimation battle. And we need to do everything we can. And I always say, as soon as you participate in social media, you share anything, even recipes, you are actually entering the narrative battlefield. So you should know this, you should read and meditate about, Martia Basalar-Raj's 8 rules for managing this kind of war. They are amazing. We did some episodes on it. I think also Justin Poder and Anti-Imperial Project has a great episode on it, and other people. But we need to legitimize. And I think there's something specific about YouTube. So the YouTube story with us is kind of weird, and you can have the details on our Substack if you're interested. We're launching a petition to try to have it back, because I believe YouTube is kind of it's not like X or others. It really is the place, the monopoly on this side of China's great cyber world. Thank Marx for that idea they had. It's the village, the world village place of long form content of ideas. It's a near monopoly. Other platforms like Rumble, Odyssey, or whatever are minuscule in this regard. So I think, they've been picking off lots and lots of content producers, and we need to band together to defend, this anti-imperialist discourse that we hold, that we carry forward, that legitimation battle that we are actually waging. And I think it's pretty important to fight on that thing, because we can't just wait for each and every one of us to be picked off one after the other. I believe it's, we should do something about it. And so, hopefully you can sign the petition. You can go on our Substack, find this, but generally speaking, make noise. And I think we need to get organized to defend the possibility of speaking on YouTube. It can be done. They just put out this thing that they will now unban some of the channels they banned after January the 6th and COVID, and talking about a stolen election in, was it 2020? Of course, it's always the right wing that will get leniency, but I think we should go on that front. But no matter what happens with this, what's really important to remember is there are 2 pillars to this struggle. One is the actual armed struggle, and materially speaking, we are at a place that we never were. They can't do a Vietnam anymore. They just don't have the material means. And military technology is such that they can be resisted. And on the other side is this legitimation battle. And literally every word we put out, every video we record, everything we say, we can look at it as, okay, am I legitimizing the deep state psychological resistance to this, genocidal empire that tries to give different fundamental human worth to human beings according to whatever, generally skin color or religion or culture or whatever? Or am I, standing grounded in my own common humanity and legitimizing a world in which we all have the same basic human worth, the same right of individual and collective self-determination, and the same right to sovereignty? Because this is the one thing this empire cannot stand: sovereignty. This is why they go after Iran. This is why they go after Venezuela. This is why they go after Hamas, and China and Russia, because those are islands of sovereignty that we need to legitimize, because this is the way to save the whole of humanity eventually.
Yes, and really excellent words. Everyone check out on the banner. There's a petition you can sign to have YouTube reinstate resistance is fertile. And I think what you're talking about, Benji, about needing a wider collaboration and preparation for collective responses to this. This reminds me very much of what I wish I would see more of in the global South resisting American hegemony. Is don't wait until you're the target. Work with those who are being targeted to create a solidarity front that stops empire in its tracks. Otherwise, if you wait, one by one being picked off, and we see that this is a tactic of, the Zionist entity, is that it creates a so-called ceasefire, more like a peace fire. They use these peace plans to continue a war by other means, but they immediately then turn when they've managed to stabilize one front because they failed in their goals. Then they turn immediately to trying to undermine and make war and subvert and regime change somewhere else. And this is a weakness. If we wait until we are targeted, you might at that point be alone and without solidarity. So it's very important that we start working on these things now. So go to that petition, please, and sign up there for sure. Wondering if anybody else has any other thoughts about like the media environment. I know it's getting late, especially for Nihal. So if you want, we can move to final thoughts either on this topic or anything else that you didn't get a chance to talk about that you want to, and also to tell people where they can follow your work and how to stay in touch with what you're doing. So maybe we'll go around for some final thoughts on this topic and anything else that you'd like to mention. Nihal, where can people follow you and find your work?
Yeah, thanks for having me. You can follow me on Twitter, Nihalist, and on Instagram at Nihal El-Aasar. I'm sure you'll have the handles. And yeah, thanks for having me, and eyes on Venezuela.
Mm-hmm. Nina, how about you? Any final thoughts, and how should people?
I would just say I agree, eyes on Venezuela. And I think that's it. You can Google me and things will pop up. Look at my work bio. I won't mention my work, but you can look at the bio.
But I think what you were saying too also about how it's very important that we start to make more noise about Venezuela. The fact that all of these protests about Trump just seem to readily accept, these narratives of the necessity of doing something about Venezuela, accepting the propaganda about the situation there, about the so-called illegitimacy of Maduro, etc. So it's very important that we raise the stakes. You pointed out that it's really the solidarity of the Venezuelan people that will prevent any success in these regime change operations that have been going on for more than a decade, basically since the Chavez revolution. But it may help also to raise the temperature and to show that there will be solidarity and resistance here in the imperial core as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very important point that you raised.
Yeah.
Terrific. Camila, how can people follow you? And I know you're the editor of a news service that perhaps you could tell people about.
Yeah, we founded Causachi News in 2020 during the coup in Bolivia, and right now we are basically closing a chapter in Bolivian history and returning to the neoliberal period. Today in Bolivia is the second round runoff of the presidential elections, in which two candidates of the right, and one of them is a far right figure who has put a lot of time into leading regional efforts to oust President Maduro, Tuto Quiroga. He is one of the figures running for the election, and the other is another right-wing candidate. And so what was elected as the MAS, led by formerly Evo Morales, but Luis Arce, who returned the country to democracy post-coup, they're now being ousted from power because, long story short, Evo Morales, the most popular and important political figure in the country and a very important historical indigenous leader and leader of social movements, was barred from running and is under constant attack by the right wing in the country, and has faced a really heavy persecution campaign. And so that was the reason why we started Causachi News. It's been very difficult, just to touch on your question. It's very difficult to work in this environment right now as media, when we don't have resources, and there's absolutely no one anywhere willing to fund this sort of coverage. Right now, today, people are very interested in Venezuela because of the geopolitical context, and because we're looking as if we're going towards a war on Venezuelan soil in one way or another. That's the only reason why people are paying attention to Latin America. But outside of this, things are going on all the time. Right now, we are, we're on the third or fourth week of a national strike and road blockades all across Ecuador that is confronting the neoliberal puppet government of Daniel Noboa, which is part of the criminal cartel that is actually running drugs all around the world, from Ecuador to the furthest parts of Eastern Europe and beyond. And so this is actually the context of Ecuador. Right now, we're in elections, the second round runoff election that is going to fundamentally transform and reconstitute Bolivia. And the rest of Latin America is going to have a huge domino effect. What happens right now as they're counting votes and as the right returns to power, even though Bolivia is such a small country of just 11 million people and a small, underdeveloped economy, it's going to have massive repercussions across the region. And it's part of the reason why the US feels so emboldened to be able to aggress Venezuela in that way, is because of this right-wing shift in Bolivia, and because of the opening they saw because Trinidad and Tobago changed governments recently this year as well. And so there's a lot happening in the region right now. We have huge protests every single day in Peru. If anyone knows what's going on in Peru, they just impeached their president. And this is like the 8th president in 7 years. It's unbelievable. What is going on in Peru? Well, that's a whole nother conversation. But trying to break through the censorship is incredibly difficult, and it requires resources, and we simply don't have the resources. It's a constantly losing battle. And I have to say, because I come from a family of armed combatants, I come from a family where both sides of my family were in the armed guerrilla in El Salvador during the conflict, and I know a lot of veterans and a lot of people who have fought and have put their lives on the line to fight against U.S. imperialism and the death squads and everything else that's taken place in Latin America and in the 80s. And I have spoken to people, and honestly, the battle that we're fighting right now is actually, in a lot of ways, far more complicated and difficult. Even though we don't have the numbers of mass killings and disappearances and what was taking place during those decades in our countries of Latin America, right now we are facing a very difficult battle to try to get our information out. We have seen that people are turning against mainstream media and the conventional ways that we got our information from newspaper, radio, and television. But now what's dominant is these far-right voices in the alternative media. The far-right voices is what has replaced that. And so it's very difficult to get information out. You have people who are supposedly on the left who are just echoing, the enemy's propaganda, the imperialist propaganda. So it's very difficult. And I just wanted to make one note of something that that was very inspiring to me, something that gives me a lot of hope, because you mentioned at the start that I accompanied the global Samud flotilla to Gaza. Of course, I didn't go all the way to Gaza. I got off before interception. However, on that flotilla, there were people from all different countries of the world. It was mostly people who were able to travel with Western passports. But, through my land coverage in Tunisia and the fact that Tunisia was one of the main countries that supported the Samud flotilla and created the infrastructure necessary to be able to go there, in addition to Spain, I met all of these different comrades from Tunisia, from Turkey, and also from Algeria. And I think people really need to know that the global majority is the global South. And these people people from countries all across the world are truly, becoming more and more conscious every day at what's going on. So many people during the time the Samud was sailing, from Turkey, from, of course, Iran, from Libya, from Algeria, even from Morocco, they wanted to start their own flotillas. I mean, these people are extremely in favor of Palestinian liberation and against the Zionist imperialist Nazi fascist project. And that is how people are feeling everywhere. And this is like the voice of that, which, that's the same sentiment that we have throughout a lot of Latin America as well. That's completely silenced. I think people in the global north need to know that if you're against Nazi fascism and mass killing and the complete disregard for international law and everything like that, that you're not alone, that just means that you feel the same as most people around the world. It's not some radical idea that you have all on your own. I was deeply inspired by this. There was a flotilla that departed and sailed with the Samud, and it was the Omar al-Makhtar Libyan flotilla. It was organized in the Libyan capital, and most of the 17 people on board were Libyan. I mean, but thousands of people from these northern African countries, as well as Turkey, as well as Iran, wanted to get on boats and sail. Of course, we don't know what the Zionist regime would have done to them if they had, but it's like, but people need to understand that it's that this opposition to imperialism is growing, that we're not alone, but we need to convert that into action. And so obviously this sort of dissemination of information and being present in the propaganda war is part of it, but it's very difficult. But it also needs to go beyond that to some concrete actions. And that's one of the things I wanted to say coming back from the flotilla, is that although I know there's a lot of people, Western citizens, who want to go on a boat and travel to try to do their part to break the siege on Gaza, that there are actions that need to be taken at home. When you live in the belly of the beast, you're going to need to be confronting it. And it would be the greatest act of international solidarity if people were to do that in the countries where they come from, actually confront the imperialist powers at home. I think you're muted.
Right on. Yes.
Sorry.
Every
Yes.
word of this, Camila.
Absolutely. Wonderful words on which to bring our discussion to a close. This struggle session is about impelling people to action. So that's our call, as ever, to conclude with a positive note about trying to do things to make change in our own communities and where we have the possibility of banding together collectively and in solidarity. I did want to just thank everybody on the panel. It was so wonderful to have this conversation and to have you together here. My friend Roriki Hutchinson would have loved this conversation. He passed away a little over a week ago. Somebody I met during the pandemic online. He posted 4 pages of Marx's Das Kapital for several years, and we together started a weekly online reading group for comrades all over called Weekly Marx. And he was equally proud of his Scottish, West African, Sephardic Jewish, and indigenous Polynesian Maori background. He was an anti-racist fighter, an anti-colonial and anti-imperialist thinker, and he will be missed by his comrades in London and around the world. We're thinking of you, and we hope that we will free this world from the oppression that Roriki struggled against for his life, even though it was shorter than we wished it would have been. And he leaves a teenage son. He's about my age, and so it happened rather suddenly. But comrade, you are remembered. Rest in power. And I want to thank all the people in the chat who have been participating in a vibrant conversation, posting remarks, questions. It's really wonderful to have this community coming together. We try and have office hours weekly. I see many of the same people coming to those office hours and these monthly live streams, the struggle sessions. I hope you're finding them useful. Please do turn to action, though. And I want to conclude. We always talk about Lifeline for Gaza and the Samir Project, 2 organizations that you can use to help support people in Gaza. There's a so-called peace plan right now, but they're going to need our support and solidarity now more than ever going forward, while the world's attention drifts to many other hotspots that we were talking about, and all eyes do need to be on Venezuela. But while we can, we must also help and support our brave brethren, brothers and sisters, in Gaza. So to all of you, peace with justice and solidarity. It's been a privilege to be speaking with you and with my colleagues here on this panel in the struggle session. Until next time.
Free Palestine.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.